Literary theory and criticism is often included in the postgraduate programs in English as an essential course or as a core subject. So, in this video, we are going to discuss how literary criticism is defined, what are the different types of literary criticism, what is the criteria that is used to distinguish between different types of literary criticism, and what are the core areas of activity of literary criticism. So, let us begin. Literary criticism is actually a discourse upon discourse. Literary criticism is writing about writing. The first job of literary criticism is to define its core area or the subject or the object of study. So, in order to find out or delimit the object of study, literary criticism begins with the first step first. The first step is to define its core area, that is literature. Literary criticism should define what it is going to study or what it is going to be about. Literary criticism is defined by what it does. So literary criticism is writing about writing. It is a kind of discourse upon discourse. So the first job of literary criticism is to delimit or is to define its object of study. Its object of study, as we know, is literature. And we have multiple definitions of literature given by many scholars across times. So, the first task or first activity with which literary criticism should deal is defining literature. So what does it define? It should define what is literature. What is literature? Then the next activity or the area of activity is classification of literature. So after defining literature, it goes into classification of literature. And we have drama, poetry, fiction, and so on. Different types of literature, different genres and subgenres of literature. In drama, we have tragedy, comedy, tragicomedy, minor genres like farce. So, in poetry also, we have sonnet, we have ballad, we have ode, and so on. So, this classification is a result of, let us say, a tradition of critical activity in the area of literary criticism. Next area of activity with which literary criticism deals is analysis. So in order to understand any literary work, you need to break it down into small pieces and look at them very curiously and cautiously, at the same time with critical bent of mind. So all these activities combined in analysis of literature. So analysis is one of the steps in interpreting literature. So the next activity that deals with that literary criticism deals with is interpretation. So we know that there can be multiple interpretations of a same text, and this is made possible by, let us say, arbitrariness of language. Literature uses language as its medium, and we know that one word may have different meanings in different contexts, and since literature uses language as its medium, there are multiple interpretations of literature or literary pieces or texts. And the next important area with which criticism deals is evaluation. So after reading or after, let us say, enjoying a work of art, the reader assesses consciously or subconsciously the literary value of a work or the entertainment value of a work. So, what kind of pleasure does that literary work give? Is it aesthetic pleasure, or is it superficial pleasure, or is it, let us say, a kind of vulgar pleasure? So, there are different types of, let us say, literatures, and there are different ways of evaluating literature across a tradition of literary criticism. Let us say Western tradition is almost 2500 years. It goes back to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. So across, let us say, centuries, different critics evolved different criteria to judge the value of a literary work in a given time. So this is also one of the crucial and important activities of literary criticism. So we may not have a pinpoint definition of literary criticism, but when we say it is discourse upon discourse or writing about writing, so literary criticism is writing about literature. But all writing about literature doesn't qualify as literary criticism. There are different types of literary criticism. So the major four types of criticism are listed here. One is theoretical criticism, another is practical or applied criticism, impressionistic criticism, and judicial criticism. So let us look at them one by one. Theoretical criticism deals with establishing general principles and formulating terms, distinctions, and categories, or rather standards and norms, which will be used for assessing works of art or works of literature. There are many critics who theorized about literature, right from Aristotle, Longinus, Horace, the Greco-Roman critics, Boileau, Goethe, Johnson, Coleridge, and Poe, and many more. These are some representative examples. So there are critics who had given different theories about literature. The next type of criticism is practical or applied criticism. So it assesses works or individual works of individual writers, but its principles and standards or norms by which assessment is made are often implicit. So here are some examples. Johnson's Lives of the English Poets, which was written during 1779 to 81, is one of the examples. Richard's practical criticism is one of the masterpieces of this kind of criticism. T.S. Eliot's Selected Essays is also a good collection of essays, assessment of different works. The next type of literary criticism is impressionistic criticism. Impressionistic criticism deals with felt qualities of a work or a passage. So, what is the response of a critic or an individual to the impression evoked in that particular individual reader or audience by a given literary work? And that is the object of study. So, we have a quotation from Hazlitt where he says, "You decide from feeling and not reason." So, literary works or works of art rather deal with your emotions, appeal to your emotions, not your reason, the logical capacity of your mind. So that is why even Walter Pater, a 19th century art critic, also writes about literary criticism, and he says, what is this song or picture to me is important rather than anything else. So impressionistic criticism deals with the response of its readers towards the literary work. The next type of literary criticism is judicial criticism. So it deals with judgment based on a specified criteria. So it applies a particular criteria to an individual work and gives a judgment whether the work is worth reading or not reading, good or bad, or what kind of aesthetic pleasure does it afford to the reader, or it doesn't at all. So it is often combined with other modes of criticism, especially impressionistic mode of criticism. Examples are Longinus' commentary on characterization in Odyssey, a lot of essays written by Hazlitt, treatises written by Pater, essays by Woolf and Foster can be seen as judicial criticism. So we find this kind of criticism abundant in research writing about literature. There are 4 more types of literary criticism, but the criteria for making this distinction are different. So these are 4 types of criticism according to focus area. First one is mimetic criticism, second one is pragmatic, third one is expressive criticism, and fourth one is objective criticism. So the core of all this is the work of art, and work of art is often defined as imitation or mimesis. So Plato, Aristotle, and subsequent English and other critics also accepted this definition of literature. So it is reflection of the world or universe. Another area is the reader or the audience, how the reader and audience establishes connection with that work of art. What is the impact of work of art on the audience? And the third one is the artist or the author. So these are the coordinates of criticism. Now let us see that when you try to deal with the relationship between world or universe and the work of art, it is the area of mimetic theory or mimetic criticism. So when you go on to explore the world and work of art relationship, that area becomes mimetic. So Plato used mimesis in relation to arts for the first time in his treatise Republic. Aristotle was his disciple. He borrowed the term from his master, but he had positive opinion about imitation. And then even Sidney, 16th century English critic, also accepted that art and poetry is imitation. Till 18th century, when Wordsworth, at the end of 18th century in the year 1800, published his Preface to Lyrical Ballads. Till that time, mimesis was a prominent mode. The next important point is the reader or audience and work of art connection. The area is known as pragmatic criticism. So what is the use or what is the impact of work of art on the reader or the audience, and how a reader or audience responds to the work of art. The third important coordinate is artist or author. So very often it is seen as the work of art is seen as product of artist or author. So Wordsworth defined poetry and art in general as expression of powerful feelings. So this kind of theorization about art falls under the domain of expressive. So expressive theories are there, and it began with a romantic period in English literature. The next important area of activity is the objective domain of literary criticism, when all other coordinates do not matter, only the work of art matters. So at the middle of 19th century, there was a rise of aestheticism, and people started questioning the use value of literature, and aestheticism gave a new kind of dictum, new kind of motto to art for art's sake. Art cannot be judged from any extrinsic criteria. a work of art is independent and it exists for itself. So that kind of we can say criticism can be said to be delimiting its area to work of art, avoiding any external reference. So this particular kind of criticism is called objective criticism. So let us summarize what we have discussed in this particular video. We started with defining literary criticism and listing its core areas of activity, which are defining, classifying, analyzing, interpreting, and evaluating works of art. Then we discussed 4 types of literary criticism, that is theoretical criticism, practical criticism or applied criticism, impressionistic criticism, and judicial criticism. We also discussed 4 types of criticism according to its focus area. First one is mimetic criticism, the second one is pragmatic criticism, the third one is expressive criticism, and the last one is objective criticism.